Yo, what's good? Welcome back to Groove Selective. Today we're going to be remaking an industrial techno banger, Pressure by Sara Landry. Sara is a self-taught producer, audio engineer and DJ known for her high energy tracks like Play With Me and Heaven. Let's jump into a preview of what we will be making today. So let's jump straight in. We're going to be starting off with this bass line, and we're going to look at the notes here. You're going to be starting on F and then moving to F sharp and then resolving on the F. You can create a 16th note sequence, and then you're just going to take the first note out. These notes can be eliminated using sidechain. However, in this case, I've just taken out the notes, and that's going to create a little bit of space in the mix for that kick to cut through. And then moving on to the sound design for the bass, we're going for like a Psytrance bass line. Now, you can find this sound in the Groove Selective Warehouse Techno Volume 1 pack. You're going to have access to over 250 different sounds, whether that's the Serum 2 presets, the samples, or the loops, and it's going to help you make these warehouse or hard techno bangers. Now, for this sound, we're only using one oscillator. We're going to head over to oscillator A, and you're going to select DS, saw, and try. So if you go to analog, you can select this just here, and then you're going to turn this down by 1 octave. Your wavetable position can be kept at 1, and then you're going to move over to this warp function here, and we're going to select asymmetric plus, and then turn this up to around 45%. And then we're going to move on to the noise. So when using alpha noise, you can find this as the first one in analog, and you're going to set your level to around 25%. And then we're going to move on to filter 1. Filter 1 is affecting our oscillator A and our noise. Oscillator B is currently turned off. If you want to layer some of your wavetables, you can. Just make sure you turn your filter on so it affects these two. Keep your cutoff in the center, turn your resonance up by 10%, and then we're going to move over to envelope 1. Envelope 1, you can just copy our ADSR settings here, and we're opting for a fast attack and quite a quick release time. The bass needs to be clicky and punchy. And then this is where the magic starts to happen. If you copy our ADSR settings for envelope 2, and you're going to link this to your cutoff filter, and this is what is going to be shaping our bass sound. Then we're going to move over to our effects. You're going to be starting off with distortion, and you're going to use the downsample model. You're going to turn your drive up to around 20% and your mix to around 20%. Then you're going to use a delay. You're going to select 64 note and 32 note, and then make sure this stays triplet half note here. You're going to set your feedback to 0, and then you're going to turn your mix up to around 35%. Moving on to our compressor. Our compressor is controlling those dynamics. We're bringing out a little bit of that top end, got a little bit of a scoop in that mid range, and we're bringing out that low end energy. Then we're moving on to the hyper module. We're not using the dimension module in this instance, just to add a little bit more width. You can set the mix level to 8%, turn the rate all the way down, and set your detune to 20%. And then we're moving on to the EQ. Again, we're creating this scooped mid-range. You're going to boost the low end and the lower mid-range by around 13 to 14 decibels, and then you're going to boost the top end by around 16 decibels. Then you're going to use a cutoff filter, set this to around 50 hertz, and this is just going to be scooping out some of those lows where it's going to be taking unnecessary headroom in our mix. And by the end of the sound, it should sound a little bit like this. Next, we're going to be moving on to our screech. Now, our screech is only performing on the note of F. We've got 16th notes for 2 bars, and then for the final 2 bars, we've got this triplet pattern, which is 8th note triplet. And next, we're going to move on to the sound design for the screech. And again, you can find this sound in the Warehouse Techno Volume 1 pack in the link down below. And we're only using 1 oscillator again. We're just going to be using a saw wave, and you're going to turn this up by 2 octaves. Then the unison is going to be set to 16. You're going to set your detune to around 0.7, and your blend is going to be set to around 75. And then for envelope 1, you can copy our ADSR settings here, and then link envelope 2 to your detune module. Next, we're going to move on to envelope 3, and this is currently affecting a couple of our modules in the effects tab. Copy our ADSR settings here, and then we're going to move on to the effects tab, and this is going to be linked to our distortion. You're going to use the sine shaper model. You're going to link envelope 3 to the frequency and to the Q factor, and the Q factor is what shapes how harsh the resonance is. So if I do this here, we can see that gets quite harsh. If I bring this back down, it's not so harsh. Then we're going to move on to our drive. You're going to set this to around 20 to 25%, and your mix level is going to be set to around 75%. Then we're going to move on to our EQ. We're cutting out these lows, so you can set your low cut to 83 Hz. You're going to boost that upper mid range and the top end. So set your frequency to 2600 plus, and then turn up your gain by around 9 decibels. Then we're moving on to our compressor. Again, this is just to control dynamics. We're bringing out some of that top end and the low end, which is scooping out some of that mid range. And finally, we've got a reverb. We're using the Hall model. The size is set to around 45%. Our decay time is set to 6 seconds. And our pre-delay is set to about 45 milliseconds. Then you're going to set your mix level to around halfway. And in context, it should sound a little bit like this. Next, we're going to move on to this pad. This whole track revolves around the F and the F sharp for the most part. The first 3 beats is just going to be playing an 8th note rhythm on the F, and for the final beat it moves to F sharp, and for the first 3 beats it's going to be 8th notes, and then that just repeats. So let's break down the sound design for this pad. This is when we start to introduce some granular synthesis, and again you can find this in the pack down below, Warehouse Techno Volume 1. You're going to start off with oscillator A, you're going to select granular, and then you're going to select Moonlight, so go Factory, Synth, and then select Moonlight here. You're going to select one shot, and you're going to turn your unison up to 3, and you're going to turn your level all the way down. Then you're moving on to oscillator B. You're going to select a saw wave, so select basic shapes. You're going to go to analog, select this here, and you're going to turn your wavetable position to position 2. Then we're moving on to our filter. We're using a bandpass filter. Your cutoff is going to be set to around 400 Hz. You're going to turn up your drive to around 45%. And your fat all the way up to 100. This is going to be affecting oscillator A, and you're going to make sure you turn key tracking on. Then we're moving on to envelope 1. Envelope 1, you can copy our ADSR settings here. This is going to be affecting the level of oscillator A and then the semitones of oscillator A. Now, if we move over to our matrix here, when envelope 1 is controlling the semitones of oscillator A, you're going to turn the amount up to 3%. Next, we're going to move on to our effects. Now, for our effects, we're using a distortion, and we're using a soft clipper. Then you're going to turn your EQ on to post. You're going to set your frequency to around 1100 and your Q factor down to 0.1. Your drive is going to be set to 0 and your mix is going to be set to 100%. The filter we can ignore for today. We're not using it for the sound. LFO was controlling the mix level for this. However, as I said, we're not using it, so we can move on to our chorus. Now for our chorus, you're going to set your rate to 16 bars and make sure you turn on BPM sync here so it syncs with your project. Your delay is going to be set to around 50%. Delay 2 can be kept at 0. Your depth is going to be set to around 35%, and your feedback is going to be set to around 15%. Then you're going to turn on your low pass filter and turn this up to around 1600. Your mix level is going to be kept at 100%. Then we're using a delay, we're using a ping pong, and this is set to quarter note. Your feedback is going to be set to around 60%, and your mix level is going to be set to around 50%. Then we're using a compressor, and this is just to control dynamics. We're bringing out that top end, bringing out that low end, and scooping out that mid range. And then we've got a reverb, and we're using the Hall model. The size is set to around 75%, pre-delay is set to 0, and the decay time is set to around 6 seconds. Then you're going to turn your mix up to around 50%, and you're going to use an EQ. You're going to cut out the low end, so your high pass filter is going to be set to 382 Hz, and your low pass filter is going to be set to 4189 Hz. And then we're just using the dimension module. Your size is going to be set to around 10%, and your mix is going to be set to around 25%. And in context, it should sound a little bit like this. Now moving on to our drums, it's really simple. The kick lands on the 1, 2, 3, and 4. The ride is playing 8th notes, but we've changed some of the velocities here, and that's just to humanize it a little bit and add a little bit more groove. In terms of the drum sounds that I've used from the pack, I've used kick 9, and then I've also used ride 2. So if we go back into Warehouse Techno Volume 1, we can find the ride 2 in cymbals. Select ride 2, and you can drag that into your quick sampler. And everything all together should sound a little bit like this. That's for lunch. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed the content, and I'll see you next time.